Mission Specialist Mike Anderson is the payload commander on this flight, which means he's responsible for managing the entire complement of experiments. Anderson, a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force, is making his second spaceflight. He previously flew on the STS-89 mission to the space station Mir in 1998.
It's certainly a privilege to have had an opportunity to have gone to the Mir space station. I think history will prove Mir to have been just really a huge stepping stone for man's permanent presence in space. And it really fostered a cooperation between the American space program and the Russian space program. I think a cooperation that's really going to be the key to future space exploration.
The Plattsburgh, New York native grew up in an Air Force family, so he's lived on several Air Force bases. However, he considers Spokane, Washington to be his hometown. Anderson says he's been interested in flying and science for as long as he can remember. When he enrolled at the University of Washington, he decided to major in physics because it was applicable to all areas of science. He also joined the Air Force ROTC. After graduation, Anderson accepted a commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Force as a communication electronics officer.
So I got a chance to learn a little bit about electronics and apply some of my knowledge of physics to improve the communication systems in the Air Force and working on computers and things like that. But my real interest was flying airplanes. So after 4 years of doing that, I put in my application for flight school and got selected for flight school, and off I went.
After flight school, Anderson was assigned to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska as an EC-135 pilot. He then became an aircraft commander and flight instructor at Wurtsmith Air Force Base in Michigan. After receiving his master's degree in physics from Creighton University, Anderson applied to NASA and was selected in 1994. He says this mission will always be special to him.
So we've all worked very closely together to try to make this a successful flight. It's been a lot of fun. I think when I look back on this flight years from now, the one thing that I'll really remember and appreciate is the friendships that I've made with my crewmates.
Columbia, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
And Columbia's ready.
National Public Radio, this is Houston. Please call Columbia for a voice check.
Columbia, this is National Public Radio. How do you hear me?
National Public Radio, this is Columbia. We hear you loud and clear.
Mike, as one of the 7 active African-American astronauts, what do you see as the future of African-Americans in space?
Well, that's a good question. I see the future as being pretty bright. As you mentioned, there are 7 of us. Bob Kirby will be flying in just a few months. Then, of course, later in the year, we'll have Joan Higginbotham flying. And early next year, you'll see Stephanie Wilson flying. So it looks like the future is really bright. And not only that, we also have some research that I think will be really beneficial to the African-American community. On board this flight, we have a bioreactor, which is growing prostate cancer cells. And as you know, Travis, prostate cancer is a high rate of occurrence in African-American males. And hopefully from some of the research we're doing up here, we can really help out in those areas.
Willie, this is your first space flight, I understand. How does your experience compare with what you expected?
There is so much more than what I ever expected. It's beyond imagination until you actually get up and see it and experience it and feel it. So I would say the things that are new to me are the zero-G type changes to my body and the zero-G changes to the things that we do routinely day to day that you can only imagine, but you can't really quite imagine it quite right until you get up and do it.
Mike, you're the payload commander of this mission. What exactly does a payload commander do?
Well, if I could show you in the back of the shuttle, you'd see our laboratory. And back there we have hundreds of experiments, and those are our payloads. So my job is to manage those experiments and to make sure everything gets done properly. So with the help of all my crewmates, that's where we spend most of our time each day in the payload bay working on those experiments. And really the job started well before flight, working with the scientists and engineers and making sure that the payloads were designed properly and that we were going to get the right results on orbit. So far, I have to tell you, we've been really pleased with what we're seeing. We're exceeding almost all of our expectations, and we're getting some really good science.
Willie, I understand you're doing an experiment involving African dust. Now, you got to tell me, what's that about?
Well, believe it or not, there's a lot of dust in the air, and it contributes significantly, we think, to the temperature of the Earth, and it may have impacts on global warming. So we're looking specifically at dust that comes out of the North African Saharan area that migrates across the jet streams, across the Atlantic Ocean up into the Mediterranean. And we have some radiometric cameras that measure the reflectivity of that dust to see how it reflects the sunlight from the Earth's atmosphere.
Mike, before we began this conversation, I just got off my treadmill. I understand you have an extra cycle up there in space, partly to keep in shape, I guess, but also partly to run experiments. Tell me about your extra cycle.
Well, we do try to exercise a little bit every day just to stay in shape, so that when we do return to Earth, we'll be able to actually walk off the orbiter. But we're also using that ergometer as part of a larger experiment, which we're really taking a close look at the cardiovascular system of the human being and seeing how it adapts to space and what kind of changes that go on in the body once you do come up into space and how quickly you react when you come back to Earth. So we spend a little bit of time each day cuddling around, and I tell you, there's nothing better than listening to a good album and looking out the windows and watching the world go by while you pedal on the bike.
Willie, I've only got about 30 seconds left here. When you look out the window, what exactly do you see right now, and where over the world are you exactly?
Well, I'm going to lift the lid. Dave's actually going to lift it here. We have a world map display. We're on the dark side of the Earth, approaching Chile, actually. So we have covers right now over the windows because we go from light to dark and dark to light. We don't want to have to create shadows suddenly here in our TV images. So right now, if we were to look out, we'd see city lights of South America.
Thank you both, and enjoy the flight.
Thank you, Travis.
Columbia, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the NPR portion of the event. Please stand by for a voice check from KXLY TV.